On the evening of July 24th, 2023, at 7:30 p.m, in the dense forest near Divnogorsk, Russia, search teams discovered a horrifying scene: the remains of a female who had vanished 2 days prior. The signs were unmistakable. She had met a brutal, violent end. For 2 days, the police and local residents were all looking for the much-loved person. This was not normal, and she had no reason to simply vanish. It didn't take long for authorities to catch her assailant, who, chillingly, confessed to the gruesome details with the hopes that people would take pity on him. But it didn't stop there. This wasn't just any criminal. He was already a convicted murderer, a man who had been imprisoned twice for serious crimes. So, why was he free? And how had he managed to unleash such terror once again? In his own haunting words, he admitted, "I can't stop myself." This case blew me away when I heard of it. Like, I can understand a killer being released with some rehabilitation, but after 2 serious crimes, and then they're released with no supervision, it just sounds crazy to me. They need strict monitoring or remain in prison. Before we dive in, I just want to let you know that some parts of this case have no imagery, so I've done my best to give you a visual representation. And as ever, if you find this video fascinating, then please drop it a like and subscribe if you are new to see my latest videos. Thank you. This video is created solely for educational and documentary purposes. It does not endorse or condone the criminal actions described within. Polina Bovoy was a bright 16-year-old student living in the small town of Divnogorsk, just outside the city of Krasnoyarsk, where she often spent her time. She was popular, creative, and mature for her age. Polina had a close-knit circle of friends and a great relationship with her family. From a young age, she had a passion for crafting, drawing, cross-stitching, and making bracelets from rubber bands. She just liked crafting in general. Her father, Andrew, a police officer, was a big influence in her life. For his birthday, when she was just 14, she put her creative skills to work, using a wood-burning kit to make him this heartfelt gift. On her 15th birthday, Polina received a guitar, a gift that quickly became her most treasured possession. She would spend hours writing songs and poetry, her lyrics filled with hopes and dreams for the future. One thing Polina had planned for the future was a career in the military. She hoped to become a psychologist, and she was on her way to military school. A friend said this about her, and quote, "She sang songs, played the ukulele, even recorded a couple of tracks. Well, it was more of an amateur thing. Quite a creative girl. The whole city knew her, most of them for sure. Almost all teenagers. I think she had a lot of friends. Of course, there were parties. She's an ordinary 16-year-old. Polina's family had a strong bond, and her parents knew all her friends. There were no secrets, and Polina, being well-behaved and responsible, always kept them informed if she had any major plans or intended to be away. That's why, when she failed to check in on that fateful day, July 22nd, 2023, her parents were immediately alarmed, and then began their horrific nightmare. Polina had arranged to meet her best friend for a walk near the city centre that evening. She promised her father that she'd be back by 10 p.m, and this was normal, and something she always abided by. She was wearing a black dress with white sandals, and she left the home carrying her mobile phone and a few belongings in a small bag, ready for an evening out. Later, as the clock struck 10, Andrew grew concerned. Polina hadn't returned. He tried calling her, but her phone was dead. Alarmed, he immediately contacted her friend, who explained that Polina had called her halfway to meeting her at 6:24 p.m. to say that her phone was about to die, but assured her that she was still on her way. Her friend waited at the meeting spot for half an hour after they planned to meet. She tried to phone Polina, but her phone was dead. Her friend assumed that she must have had a change of plans and went home, and so her friend made her way home. Andrew's worry intensified as he frantically called every friend and family member he could think of, but no one had seen or heard from Polina. This was unlike her. She never disappeared, especially without telling her parents. Both Andrew and his wife Oksana knew, even at this point, that something was terribly wrong. Without delay, they went to the police station and filled out a missing person report, and immediately a desperate search began for their beloved daughter. Because Polina's father was a cop himself, a lot of the officers searching for her knew her personally. It was like they had all lost one of their own. For 2 relentless days, search teams worked around the clock, scouring every corner of Divnogorsk. Then, on the 3rd day, at 7:30 p.m, a group of volunteers trained in locating missing youth made the grim discovery. Just 30 meters from the R257 Yenzi highway, which led to the city centre, near a secluded viaduct, they found Polina's remains. The scene was horrifying. Polina's throat had been slashed so deeply, it was as if her neck had been stabbed open. She was found almost naked and loosely wearing her underwear. Her dress and bra were discarded nearby, and her bag and phone were lying next to her, but her other belongings were missing. Officers also discovered a knife close to her body, a suspected murder weapon. They sent this along with some DNA evidence found on the remains of Polina for testing. Within hours, results came back, identifying a suspect in the criminal database, a man named Ivan Papenko. He came from a nearby village, but he currently had no fixed abode. But officers were well on his trail, and after a short search for the suspect, he was found in a flat where he had been staying with a female friend he had recently made and her mother. Special forces entered the flat, and although Papenko tried to resist, within seconds he was on the floor, handcuffed. During his arrest, he tried to hide his identity, but obviously this did not work. Shockingly, Papenko showed no remorse and was eager to tell the grisly details of his crime. Even more disturbingly, this was not his first offence. He was a repeat offender, previously imprisoned for 2 other serious crimes. This only deepened the agony of Polina's family as they grappled with the brutal loss of their daughter and the question, how had this man with such a violent past been allowed back on the streets, and what exactly had happened to their beloved daughter? Ivan Papenko had spent half his life behind bars. He began his criminal life in 2004, where he would steal and rob cars. But 2009 is when he committed his first serious crime, when he was just 20 years old. On the morning of July 21st, 2009, Ivan Papenko awoke to the familiar sting of a hangover. Life for him lately was an endless cycle of drinking and regret. Each day was bleeding into the next. Unemployed and desperate for money, he knew he needed quick cash. A plan formed in his mind, simple yet effective. He'd gather scrap metal with his friends, Lavantriev and Voyakin, and then go and sell it. When he asked them, the men agreed, and after exchanging the metal for a few rubles, they stopped at a nearby shop, buying 2 bottles of port wine and several packets of cigarettes. The trio found a spot near a local school and settled down to drink, the wine dulling the edges of reality. Time rolled on as they smoked and drank. It was a bleak existence. But as afternoon fell, they made their way to Laurentieve's house, seeking a place to continue their drinking session. At the house, they kept drinking, but soon the alcohol was gone. Papenko and Voyakin went out to find more alcohol, returning with 2 bottles of bath liquid, a harsh concoction that people drank to get high cheaply. When they returned, Larentrieve had fallen asleep. The 2 men didn't care. They diluted the liquid with water and began drinking it, burning their throats as they drank. The 2 men began to get rowdy with one another in a drunken state. The noise awoke Larentrieve, who rose and joined them, but this time he held an axe in his hand. Offering Papenko a drink, he began hurling insults, mocking Papenko with slurred obscenities. The tension grew thick. Voyakin, sensing the brewing conflict, excused himself to bed, leaving Papenko and Larentrieve alone in the dim light of the room. As Larentrieve continued his mocking, Papenko's patience thinned. He stared at the axe in Larentrieve's hand. "Give me the axe," he demanded, in a low voice. Larentrieve, almost amused, handed it over, but his insults did not stop. "Enough," Papenko said, gripping the axe tightly. His voice dropped to a menacing tone. He warned him, saying, "I'll kill you if you don't stop." But Larentrieve was fearless. Perhaps too drunk to sense the danger, he leaned forward, lowering his head and said, "Go ahead, hit me." In that instant, something snapped within Papenko. He swung the axe, the first blow landing hard against Larentrieve's neck. Blood splattered as he struck again and again, each blow a release of rage and brutal violence. Papenko lost count as he struck his friend's lifeless body over and over. When he finally stopped, the gruesome scene around him slowly came into focus. Blood splattered across the walls and staining the ceiling as well. Papenko stared at his blood-covered hands, thinking about what he had just done. He stumbled to where Voyakin slept, waking him and telling him that they needed to leave. He washed himself, trying to scrub away the blood. Then the two men left the house, abandoning the horror that had just happened. It was Larentrieve's sister who would first enter the house afterwards. She was greeted by a sight she'd never forget, the scene of her brother's brutal end. Later in court, he claimed he hadn't meant to kill his friend, yet he struck him at least 10 times in a brutal frenzy. Papenko only served 5 years for this crime and was released in 2014 aged 25. And just 10 days after leaving the strict regime colony, he struck again. On the afternoon of August 13th, 2014, between 4 and 5 p.m, on a secluded path in Divnogorsk, Ivan Papenko was walking around looking for his next victim. Hidden beneath his clothes, he carried an air pistol. He waited in the bushes, eyes scanning the path for someone who could become his prey. A young woman passed by, unaware of the man watching her every move. Papenko acted swiftly, closing the distance between them. He caught up and pushed her from behind, and as she stumbled forward, she felt the cold press of a gun against her back. Heart pounding, she obeyed his command to leave the safety of the path and enter the forest. With every step, they disappeared deeper away from any chance of help. Once Papenko felt they were a comfortable distance away, he struck her with the handle of the pistol, the impact dazing her, fear taking over. "Give me your purse," he demanded. Shaking, she handed over the small bag, which held everything she had, 4,100 rubles, and her mobile phone. But Papenko wasn't finished. He hit her again, this time in the face. He then demanded she undress and lie down on her back. She tried to resist, tears streaming down her face as she pleaded, but her pleas were no good. His grip tightened around her neck as she struggled for air, and her strength began to fade. Papenko then essayed the woman. She endured the assault in a terrified silence, realizing that each second might be her last. But Papenko had other plans. When he was finished, he dragged her to a ravine, forcing her to lie down with her head pressed against the ground. "Count to 150, he demanded. She obeyed, counting each second, hoping that he would be gone when she finally looked up. When she could no longer hear his footsteps, she lifted her head. He was gone. She scrambled to her feet, her heart racing, and grabbed her phone and purse. Barely able to process the horror, she made her way home, then to the hospital, seeking both safety and evidence of what had just happened. Meanwhile, Papenko was already attempting to disappear. He reached the bus station, changed his clothes, and fled to his hometown in Lenivo, seeking refuge in familiar territory. But 2 days later, on August 15th, the law caught up with him. He was arrested and brought back. In court, Papenko offered no defense, only admitting to the horror that had unfolded that day. He was charged with essaying, violent intimate acts, and robbery, and once again he found himself in the strict regime colony. On July 14th, 2023, Ivan Papenko was released from prison once again. This time, he was supposed to be under strict supervision, requiring daily check-ins and restricting him from leaving his hometown. But Papenko, knowing the system's weaknesses, appealed against the supervision order. That appeal process took longer than his remaining prison time, and through a loophole, he walked out entirely unsupervised. He was free, unchecked, and ready to descend back into chaos. And just 8 days after his release, he did just that. Not much is known about Papenko's early life, though one of his former teachers shared glimpses into his bleak childhood. Papenko and his older brother, Andrei, grew up in a boarding school, but after the school closed, when Papenko was only 10, she lost track of him. She did, however, recall visiting their parents' home, describing it as a squalid nightmare. She said, and quote, "A hut, a bed with a wire mesh, no sheets, no blankets, smoke filled the apartment, 3-litre milk jars on the table, flies buzzing around." She added, those parents deserved life sentences back then. At age 11, Papenko was diagnosed with multiple mental health issues and spent time in a psychiatric facility, drifting through a fractured childhood. This was all I could find on his background. By the time he was an adult, he had become a drifter, a dangerous and unpredictable figure with a growing record of violence. Following his release in July 2023, Papenko had no money, no purpose. He quickly fell back into old habits, moving in with a woman he had just met and her mother, sharing a cramped flat. The drinking resumed immediately, and thus continued the endless spiral. On the morning of July 22nd, he woke up hungover, broke and desperate. He needed more alcohol, but had no way to get it. That's when he made a plan. He would rob someone. He made his way to a secluded viaduct near the scene of his past crime. Standing there, surveying the area, he later told officers, and quote, "I didn't have any specific victim. I was just standing there and waiting for the first person to walk down. Then his opportunity arrived. A girl was walking down the viaduct, unaware of the predator lying in wait. Papenko approached her, closing with each step. As soon as he reached her, he threw a brutal punch to her face, knocking her to the ground. As she lay there, stunned and terrified, he watched her struggle. He said, and quote, "I approached her, hit her like this." He later demonstrated to officers. Then I helped her up and said, "Come with me." He led her into the depths of the forest, and the horrors were only just beginning. Once they were far enough away from prying eyes, he began to beat her. He demanded her valuables and money, which she gave to him, hoping he might leave. But Papenko wasn't finished. He then essayed her. He literally took everything from her. Afterwards, he forced her to lie face down on the ground. He tied her legs together with a strip of cloth that he had brought. He turned to leave, but a dark thought gnawed at him. What if she reported him? He said, and quote, "I was scared she would go to the police and tell them everything." He then returned to her, wrapped his hands around her neck and strangled her until the struggling stopped. He thought it was over. He thought she was dead. As he stood up to leave, he noticed her body twitch, life still lingering within her. Enraged, he grabbed a large shard of glass from the ground nearby, and he stabbed her repeatedly in the throat, slicing until her neck was torn open. In his frenzy, he dropped his own knife, a mistake that would lead to his quick capture. The forest fell silent as Papenko walked away, leaving behind his victim and the horrors he had inflicted. Following his swift capture at the flat where he had been hiding, Ivan Papenko was transferred to a pre-trial detention center where he would wait for judgment. During his trial, he seemed almost oblivious to the weight of his crimes, spending much of the proceedings with his gaze fixed on the floor, ignoring the murmurs and glares that filled the courtroom. The anger in the room was palpable. Spectators were enraged. One woman was quoted as saying, "Only a death sentence for this beast who abused her. What else? They need to be crushed. People like him cannot live. Give him to us, the people. We would tear him apart." When asked if he believed he should ever be free, Papenko responded, "No, because it's not a fact that I won't do this again. In a final statement, Papenko spoke to the court, claiming he deeply regretted his actions. He admitted having trouble sleeping at night, haunted, he said, by what he had done. In a tone that some would later describe as hollow, he pleaded for a second chance, asking the court to give him the opportunity to improve, to become a better person. But the court was unmoved. After hearing his words, the sentence was delivered: life in prison. Though Papenko would eventually have the right to appeal, he will spend the foreseeable future locked away, unable to hurt anyone again. The verdict was met with a sense of relief but also frustration. For some, no punishment could ever balance the scales for the lives he has shattered and the pain he has caused. The law in Russia is either in the process or has been changed, so cases like this cannot happen again. It's just a shame that these things have to happen to innocent people like Polina for that change to come. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay sane.